Thanks everyone for joining today. Quick housekeeping. A runtime of this conversation is about an hour and hoping to save some time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A at any point. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen, and our team's going to curate those for the end as we go. We are recording the session and we're going to post it to our site at cartwheel.org next week. And with that, let's dive in. So my name is Joe English. I'm the CEO here at Cartwheel. We're a pediatric mental health clinic that works specifically with school districts across 15 states. I want to just briefly set the stage on why we're here before we jump in. Personally, I grew up in a very rural town in upstate New York. Our local public school was the heart and soul of our community. I think people looked to it for a lot more than education. They looked to it for social services and a hot meal and a roof in some cases, and definitely for healthcare and mental health care. And we happened to be very lucky that we had a great superintendent and faculty and staff who did their very best kind of day in and day out to meet those needs, I think especially around mental health. And no surprise to a lot of the folks on this call, just like in so many schools, the needs really exceeded the capacity to meet them. So I started Cartwheel several years ago to help schools kind of learn about and address the mental health of their students, families, and staff. We deliver therapy and psychiatry through evidence-based telehealth and have built a technology platform in collaboration with our schools and departments of public health to help the trusted adults in students' lives, families, school, and clinicians easily collaborate throughout care. We now serve about 1 million students. It is crystal clear that school leaders are facing a historic and a constantly evolving mental health crisis among their students and their staff. People hoped that that was going to go away in the year or two after the pandemic. It hasn't. And importantly, I think for today, the data that we've been able to collect across about 200 school districts, rural and urban, high and low income, red and blue, public and charter, shows that technology use and social media are two of the top reasons why students and families are seeking clinical levels of mental health care. So with that context, I am thrilled to bring together this great group of experts and policymakers to discuss this topic in real depth, specifically the relationship between phones and social media and the mental health in our schools. So our panel today, we have social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He's a New York Times bestselling author of The Anxious Generation. He sparked a movement across the country and really the world to roll back the phone-based childhood, including advocating for phone-free schools. New York Governor Kathy Hochul from my home state, very proud to have you here, joins us, having just unveiled legislation to limit the use of cell phones in K-12 schools throughout the entire school day. Governor Hochul's proposal comes as a follow-up to his signature achievement last year, limiting the use of addictive algorithms by social media companies in New York. Secretary Katie Jenner leads the Indiana Department of Education. Under Dr. Jenner's leadership, Indiana is focused on 3 pillars: student learning and opportunity, educator talent, quality and value, and system alignment and capacity. This year, schools across Indiana have already been implementing a law restricting the use of cell phones during instructional time. So thank you for being here. And last but not least is New York City high school student Juliet Weisvogel. Juliet wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled, "I'm a 17-year-old TikTok junkie. I need this ban." Great title. Very grateful to Juliet for joining us today to share her perspective as a student who might be impacted by Governor Hochul's legislation. So on that note, I'd love to start the conversation with you, Juliet. In your article, you talked about how sometimes you sit down to look at TikTok for a minute, and that minute can spiral and swell into hours. And it really stuck out to me. You said you hold 2 things. Like, one is you said you can't imagine life without TikTok, and it also makes you really worried about the future of your generation. Right? So tell us why you believe that kind of regulating platforms like TikTok would help you and your peers the most.
Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on here today. This is an incredible panel with really accomplished and talented people, and I'm just so honored to be here, especially because this is a conversation that, kind of revolves around my generation. So I'm really grateful that you thought to have one of us on here. So yes, I did write in my article that it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. I come home from school, I collapse onto my bed, and I look at TikTok for just like hours on end. And, it doesn't leave me feeling very good after, and it certainly does not allow for much homework to get done. But TikTok is just a part of the culture. It defines what we wear, what we talk about, what's going on in the world for us. And we spend hours in school looking at it and do the same outside of school. You might be surprised to hear that my article actually was met with a lot of backlash on Instagram. People were really not happy with what I was saying. A lot of the comments were, this is a her problem. She needs to figure out how to manage her own time better. A nationwide ban isn't the answer to her own poor willpower skills. And maybe that's true. Maybe I should do a better job of managing my time and setting limits for myself. But also, this app is ingrained in our culture. I mean, one person setting limits for themselves or deleting the app just doesn't do anything because everyone else around them still has it. And I also think it's very interesting that, people only have such strong reactions to something like that when they feel something that they're attached to or dependent on is being taken away. I mean, addiction is real.
Mhm.
People criticize when they're scared. I feel phantom vibrations when I don't have my phone on me. I think I hear it buzzing. I never know. So, it's just we are so attached to them, and that's why I worry for the future of my generation.
Super interesting. I'd actually like to follow up with Jonathan. In your research, you said that you've come to a tentative conclusion that social media use is causing, so a lot of the growth in the mental health issues that we're talking about today. If help us understand what's happening here, the extent to which social media is driving this crisis amidst so many other factors that impact a young person's mental health. And then, kind of importantly, in your book, you also provide solutions. So what can we do about this as kind of parents, educators, policymakers?
Sure. So first, if this was just a problem in the United States, we would say, gee, what happened around 2012? Why was it that around 2012, all of the indicators of anxiety and depression went shooting up, especially for girls? The indicators are all pretty flat from the 90s through about 2010, 2011. We'd all think, what happened in America? But it happened everywhere. It happened all over the English-speaking countries in most of Europe. And no one has come up with another theory. No one can explain, no one has even proposed another theory other than the complete transformation of childhood in the space of just 5 years. So in 2010, young people were going through puberty with a flip phone or a basic phone, and they would use that to text or call their friends. They weren't talking to 100 strangers. By 2015, kids going through puberty have a smartphone with a front-facing camera, Instagram, and now they're doing this all day long. Half of our kids say that they are online almost constantly. As Juliet said, the phone's always in your hand. You're always watching it. TikTok's always there. Um, and so what we have is the collapse, not just of mental health, but also of education, which began around 2012. Scores are going down, not just in America, but around the world. And so I want us to all focus not just on social media. We need to focus on what happened when kids stopped paying attention to other people that they were with, and everything became about this. You're disconnected from your friends, you're disconnected from your teachers, you're disconnected from everybody around you. This is what I've called the great rewiring of childhood. And while I might have used the word tentative once about my conclusion, especially in the year since the book has come out, everything else we've learned, the response to the book, what parents are saying, the fact that there's been almost no pushback against the book. Everybody sees the problem, Republicans, Democrats. So it's been so exciting to be part of this bipartisan movement to restore an amazing childhood rather than just a phone-based childhood.
I'd love to get Governor Hochul to weigh in here. You've just proposed a phone-free schools policy for the state of New York. I think kind of following on what Jonathan was just saying, social media and cell phones are obviously closely related, but not exactly the same. Can you just share a little bit more about the goal of the proposal that you've put forward?
And thank you, Joe, for convening this because this is such an important conversation. And Jonathan was really the person who first brought our attention to what is going on here. And I'm always going to be grateful to him for starting the conversation and really a movement. And Juliet, I want to thank you for having the courage to stand up and really be the honest voice of your generation. I know you're not alone because I convened roundtables with teenagers over the last year. And so many of them sat with me and I asked, what's going on? Why are the depression rates so high? Why are you feeling so much pressure during a school day when you should be focused on the teacher and learning? And they all said, we can't stop ourselves. And one young woman said to me, you have to save us from ourselves. And I'm a mom, the first mom governor of New York. You hit me as a parent like that. I need to help these young people and to start changing the whole culture. So you are the last generation that has to feel this addiction. And we talk about social media. The reason the social media algorithms, which are addictive, can get to our students all day is that they have that cell phone in their hand. I want them to be liberated, at least from bell to bell, as soon as they arrive at that school and at the end of the day, and not just during instruction time, because I want kids to talk to each other during lunch and recess and phys ed, because the schools that have had the courage to go first, they said they're hearing things they've never heard before, like children's voices, students' voices, because they stopped talking to each other. And I know that we have to make dramatic changes. It is hard, but our teachers are frustrated. They're not connecting with students. The educational loss is extraordinary. And also, you mentioned the pandemic. Our young people are not over the pandemic. They didn't have the same resiliency and coping skills that we have as adults. When I gather young people and we thinking, well, this happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they're still affected by this. And the way that we can stop this is to have more states follow what we did by stopping the social media companies from having access to young people, saying literally under age 18, you cannot be bombarding our young people with addictive algorithms. And during the night, no notifications, and we're protecting your private information. So we are nation leading in terms of how aggressive we were with the social media companies. A lot of people didn't think we'd be successful, and we were. But the next step is to take away the mechanism where they can get to our young people during the course of a day. So I hope to get this done in this legislative session. I need some help, and I need your voices.
Thanks, Governor Hochul. One of the reasons I'm so excited to have Dr. Jenner here from Indiana is that schools across Indiana have been implementing a version of a cell phone policy ban, right, that was passed into law last year. So I'm curious, now that you're almost a year in, what feedback are you hearing from school districts, their leaders, and also their families on the impact of this ban on how students are showing up in school? And are there any lessons learned, right, in Indiana for states like New York or others that might be considering a version of this kind of policy?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and echoing what the governor said. Juliet, huge kudos to you for leaning into the conversation, putting your voice out there. I have freshman twin daughters, freshmen in high school. It's interesting, in Indiana, we heard Jonathan speak at Excel and Ed in November of 2023. I was with a group of legislators from Indiana. We came back in January. A bill was introduced to eliminate cell phone use during classroom instructional time, and then passed in March. We started the implementation in August, and the first week of my daughter's freshman year, they came home from high school and said, "Mom, everyone is so mad at us." And I was like, "Why? What did you do already?" And they said, "Because you passed that stupid cell phone rule." And so at first I said, okay, well, first we need to have a little civics education and talk about the branches of government. I did not pass that law. However, our legislature did, and I'm thrilled to implement it. And to the governor's point, the one thing that I would flag as a lesson learned is I think we could go further. And so I'm glad to hear New York is looking at how you can go further, and we look forward to learning what you get done and hopefully even pushing harder and faster in that. But what we've heard from throughout Indiana is we have now continuity across our state. Cell phones have to be up during instructional time. We have schools who shared that they really, really appreciate the cover that the state has given, right? Because principals and teachers, it is not easy to day after day after day take students' cell phones or remove them in the instructional environment. So they've expressed the value of the state giving them some cover. We've seen various levels of implementation. Some have gone much harder, much more strict. So Fort Wayne Community Schools, one of our largest school districts, they have locked pouches for students during the day. So it's not even in their backpack, it's in locked pouches. Many of the Indianapolis area schools keep their phones turned off in their backpack or lockers during the way. Rural Indiana, it seems like they're more of keep them in your backpack, but you can use during educational use, which is allowable, permitted during the law. And I see Jonathan shaking his head on that. We had a pre-discussion. Jonathan was pushing me, which I love. But as already shared, our teachers are expressing that it's cutting down on some of the drama that they used to experience by a simple Snapchat or a post that would happen during passing period and result in distraction academically in the classroom. Also, we're hearing teachers say their classroom is now loud again. Students aren't buried in their phone. They're actually talking to their peers. So a lot of benefits there. Initially, I would say we had some pushback in Indiana from some of our parents saying that the government was overreaching a bit. But our parents have really come around significantly to say, like, thank you. We see the benefit. And so looking forward, I think what we're considering is what else might we do to really limit that screen time a bit more? I think it is cell phones, but I also think it is iPads. It's just the hours that we have students in front of screens. We've got to reckon with as a country.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to flip the order of the next two questions. So I do want to pull Jonathan back in here. I hear from a lot of superintendents that they face that community pushback about phone-free schools up front, just like Dr. Jenner was saying. For example, some families are concerned about how they're going to be able to communicate with their kids if there's a crisis. Some school district leaders or school boards don't want to lose their autonomy in making decisions at the local level, even if ultimately they would land in the same place. Have you seen schools or state departments of education or legislators address these concerns? And second question, what are the most important elements of a phone-free school policy that have the best impact on student mental health and education outcomes? Because there's so many different flavors of these regulations, right? As we're even hearing across Indiana and New York and other states.
Oh, sure. So great. Let's talk about how to actually do this and why to do this. First, let me say I love school superintendents. I just spoke last week at the California County Superintendents Convention, 1,200 superintendents and their top admins. They were the most enthusiastic audience I have ever seen. It was really fun. And part of it is that they've all seen the problems. They know what's happening. They know what the phones are doing. They see the rise of drama. They see the declining test scores. They want to act. And I've spoken to many principals. The principals hate the phones. It doesn't do anything good for them. It makes it really hard to have order in the school. The teachers all hate the phones. It's almost impossible to teach when kids have TikTok. TikTok is always going to be more interesting than the teacher. So everyone hates the phones. Why haven't they been banned? And the reason is only one reason, because a minority of parents, some parents freak out. They say, no, you can't do this. I have to talk to my child. What if there's a school shooter? So the first thing I can say is all of those concerns about parents freaking out that you had from a year ago, they're much weaker this year, because now that everyone's talking about it, now actually you're going to find a lot more support than you ever would expect. That's the first thing. Second thing is, in talking to some superintendents and principals, they say it's important to listen, to make the parents feel heard. And so by all means, go out and ask. We're going to have a session. Tell us, what are your concerns about this policy? And they're all going to say, what if there's an emergency? What if I have to reach my child? And so you can acknowledge these their concerns in two ways. The first is, yes, if there's an emergency in your family, if you need to reach your child, as part of this policy, we are going to insist that every school have a clear plan so that if a parent calls, they have plenty of staffing to get. It might require you have an extra staff person to answer the phone, but we're going to guarantee that you will be able to reach your child. That's the first thing, because we understand sometimes things happen. And guess what? the parents then hardly ever call. The second thing is to address the school shooter thing head on, to say, and here's what I say whenever I'm asked about it, and maybe many of you could say the same thing. I say, look, I'm a parent. My kids go to New York City public schools, and if there was, God forbid, if there was an emergency, if there was a school shooter, I would desperately want to hear from them. I'd want to know that they were okay. But as educators and as parents, we have to do what's best for the kids, not what's best for us. And all the school experts say, all the security experts say, if there's an emergency, the last thing you want is for every kid to be on their phone crying to their parents, the parents rushing to the school and blocking the school. What you want is for every kid to do what they were trained to do what they drilled to do, be quiet, pay attention, follow directions, notice your surroundings. That's what's best for the kids. So address the security concerns, but then I urge you, charge ahead, because you're going to be surprised by how much support you get and how quickly the opposition fades. As Katie said, at first you get some opposition, but within a few weeks, the kids themselves say, this is so much better. School used to be fun, and part of the fun was in between classes and at lunch and at recess. Kids used to have fun, and now they're mostly on their screens during those times when they can be. So now let's turn to what kind of policy. It is absolutely vital that the policy be bell to bell. Some schools tell me that they banned it in instructional time and and it makes it a little easier for the teachers. It's better in class, but not a lot better. A survey by the National Education Administration, the NEA, surveyed teachers about how big a disruption phones are in their class. And guess what they found? The worst was when the principal says, oh, every teacher gets to set their rules. And I think, as Juliet said, like, the teachers just give up, the kids are on their phones. So that's the worst policy, but almost as bad is when students are allowed to use their phones between classes, because then they're thinking about the phone when they come into class, during class, they're desperate for it when the class ends, and in between classes, they're on their phone. So if you want to restore fun, if you want kids to want to come to school, if you want them to have friends and time with their friends, it has to be bell to bell. And the thing to keep your eye on is not just the smartphone, which is the worst of them all. It's, can they text? Can they send or receive text? Because if any kid can send or receive texts, then everybody feels they have to be on. And so the policy really has to focus not on the machinery, but on the kids' attention. We want our kids to be attending to their teachers and the other kids. And it's fine with me if they're flirting during class and not paying attention to the teacher. That is still healthy. But watching TikTok in school or porn or video games, this is terrible. So it has to be bell to bell, and it has to be everything that can text. And also the AirPods. I can't believe schools let kids wear something in their ears during class.
I want to bring this back to you, Juliet. We're talking a lot at a systems level around like how students are impacted by these different policies. How is your own school handling cell phones today? What, from your perspective as a student, what's working well? And how do you think your peers would react to going phone free during the day in the way that Jonathan's teeing up?
Yeah, so my high school is trying a method right now where we give up our phones for one day out of every 2 weeks, which is working well so far. And then the middle schoolers don't get their phone at all during the day. They give it to a box at the beginning of the day and they get it back at the end of the day. But I think what's most important is that no one size fits all for schools, because I know personally, and I think everybody knows, teenagers like forbidden fruit. If you make phones into contraband, kids are going to chase them. Like Dr. Haidt said, like if you give up your phone for one class, you're just dying to get it back at the end of class. So what I think is most important is that every school implement their own plan. And then also what Governor Hochul said, I'm really glad to hear that you talk to students about it, because I think that having us as part of the conversation is what's most important. If we feel left out, if we feel like our phones are just being taken away from us and we don't know why and we don't have any say, then that's not gonna work as well, I don't think. We're just gonna want them back even more. So I do think that every school should implement their own plan and should kind of like, do it slowly and have an open dialogue about it.
Could I respond to that, Joe? I'm sorry. So Juliet, I certainly appreciate your view and the idea of that teenagers are different and that they have strong feelings. I understand all of that. But if every school implements their own policy, we're in a collective action problem where then the kids are going to say, well, they don't have that policy at that school. Having the uniformity, having it just be a law, When I was a kid, a lot of kids smoked. You could just buy cigarettes at vending machines. But once you get a law saying, no, you know what? You can't have vending machines. You can't, we just accept it. Okay, it's hard to get cigarettes. Um, it, it, it's really, really important that that there be a uniform policy. And I think there is a one-size-fits-all policy, which is no texting, no smartphones, bell to bell. It doesn't seem that way at first, but I'm telling you, 3 or 4 weeks in, the students generally say, wow, this is so much better. And all of the teachers, they say the drama is down, bullying is down, tardiness is down, absenteeism is down. I mean, it's amazing how well the bell-to-bell policy works. And here's the universal thing they say, the universal thing. They say, and Governor Hochul referred to this, but the way they always put it is, we hear laughter in the hallways again. We haven't heard much laughter in 15 years. And the lunchroom is really loud. And so I think what we're seeing as schools are trying different things, those that have these flexible policies and, oh, well, you can take it out for classroom use, which means, look, my kids went to New York City public schools. They said, you know, the policy is you can't use your phone during class, which means you just have to hide it under your desk or in a book. And my students at university, my students go to the bathroom a lot more in order to check their phones. You have to keep the phones out for the whole day, and the students get used to it very quickly, and then they love it, and they find school's a lot more fun.
I want to zoom us out just a little bit for the next part of this.
Unless Julie wants to respond. Julie,
Yeah,
do you want to come
please,
back at me,
go for it.
please?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I totally understand everything that you're saying. And when you explain it like that, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that the key part is just keeping us in on it. Like originally in the first few
Okay.
weeks when this is implemented, like I think I'm not exactly sure the way to do this, but I think, you know, really like find ways to engage us to make sure we understand the policy and to make sure everyone understands why this is for the greater good. And then if we have a better
Perfect.
understanding at the beginning, we'll more easily ease into it in the end.
Good. We're at 100% agreement.
Okay, great.
I want to zoom us out for the last part of this discussion. There are ways in which technology can also be really helpful, right, for some young people, right? And for example, I would guess the vast majority of the people who have read up on this very issue and have read most of your articles, Jonathan, right, have done so on their phones. We know that social media has the ability to provide connection, fun, creative outlet for some creators, right? It creates income for them. And clinically, we know that telehealth on a phone or a tablet can be an effective tool to deliver mental health care to kids and families when it's done right. I'm curious for each of us to kind of speak on where we think technology can play the most positive role in mental health and student outcomes. And again, Jonathan, I'd like to start with you here. How can parents and school leaders distinguish the negative uses of technology from the positive ones? And to what extent is it even possible to regulate those negative use cases without also doing away with all the positive ones?
Well, first, everyone just assumes that there's all these positive uses of the technology. You just said it. You just said, oh, it's an outlet for creativity. Really? Look what's happening. Young people have no moments to think. They have no moments to reflect or mull. They're taking phones into the shower. Many of us get good ideas in the shower. I would say that technology is the greatest destroyer of the creativity of a generation ever invented. So don't go telling me, oh, it makes them creative. It doesn't. And then you said, as everybody says, oh, and it connects them. Really? That's why they got so lonely as soon as they got the phones? It connects them in a way that blocks human connection. So I don't buy this idea that there are all these positives. Now,
is there any way, Jonathan, is there any way to do it in a healthy, or do you think it's a binary where as soon as you introduce technology, it is required to become toxic?
No. So here's the two things to keep in mind. So the first is that stories are good. This is what people lose sight of. Humans are storytelling creatures. We've always educated our kids with stories. And so if you want to show a movie that they pay attention to, if you want to show something on a TV screen, which is not interactive, not a touch screen, there are many uses for that. I show short videos in my classes. But now distinguish between stories, which can be presented with technology, and distraction. A touch screen is a stimulus response reward loop that you don't get from television. You present something, you gamify it, the student acts, they get a little bit of dopamine. That means they're going to want to do it again and again and again. And when you're messing with dopamine during the school day, then every part of the school day that is not on a screen is now more boring. They can't pay attention. And so So get rid of almost all the touch screens, the Chromebooks, the iPads. Get rid of all of that, especially in elementary school, unless it's proven to be beneficial. And guess what? There's almost no evidence of benefit. We've been covering this on my Substack after Babel. The studies were largely funded or done by the tech companies themselves. They don't show benefits overall. There's not good research showing that there's benefits here. Test scores are going down around the world since 2012, when we introduced all this ed tech. So I don't buy the idea that, oh, well, there's pluses and minuses. Let's get more of the pluses. Okay, I'll tell you what's a plus. If someone could invent a machine, or if you could take an iPad and brick it, you make it so that it only does one thing. It only does Khan Academy. No YouTube, no nothing else, just Khan Academy. That would be good. But putting a multifunction device on a kid's desk is death to their attention. I teach college students at NYU. I used to let them use a computer, a notebook, to take notes, because I like to do that. But the TA would sit in the back and say, John, they're online shopping, they're texting, they're doing their email. None of us can help it. So we got to get the multifunction devices. The one-to-one laptop policies have been a disaster. We've got to roll those back. Sweden is doing that. Sweden was the first in to put everything online. Sweden is getting rid of it all. They're going back to paper and pencil. We've got to follow them.
One of the pieces I've heard you talk about several times during this conversation is kind of the addictive nature of the algorithm and how that affects attention span. And there's so many I think toxic externalities of that algorithm. Governor Hochul, you in New York, you've taken a targeted approach to trying to address those addictive elements of social media. Can you just speak a little bit more of the genesis of that push, and how you've also used other ways to advance a broader mental health priority, your set of mental health priorities kind of above and beyond the social media algorithms?
No, I appreciate that. And when we talk about what we're trying to do in New York, and we will do in New York, it is a completely distraction-free environment. Nothing, no smartwatches, no phone, no earbuds, nothing. And that's how we're going to get back to the place that schools should be, a place of learning. And the whole issue of addictive algorithms, the rise of addictive algorithms started around 2011, 2012. This is when they were targeting using personal information derived from our students, our children, to use to them to pull them in. And it's not always to a positive place. In fact, it's very rarely that. It is taking them to sites and information and messaging that is destructive. And that there's a direct correlation between this exposure, this bombardment of something that this young people have not looked for, but it's coming at them, and the decline in their mental health. Being a teenager is tough in any generation, but this generation has had so many more challenges. And to have young people who tell me, as I do these roundtables, I'm being bullied all day long. I have to be on because they're mocking out what I'm wearing. The girls are getting together in the restroom and they didn't include me. They're talking about what they're going to do over the weekend and I got left out. They are so stressed out. And just sitting in a room with the governor, me, and they couldn't put their phone down for 15 minutes to talk to me because they might be missing something. It is the FOMO on steroids. And I want to help them get over this. And so we have also found that we need to have mental health services in our schools. I wouldn't have thought this for my generation, but we need to help these young people overcome the addiction, start learning coping skills, learn how to treat each other as human beings, because our job is not to raise children, it's to raise adults. And we're not raising fully functioning adults if they're not used to resolving conflict in person and to work together collaboratively on a class project. And when they emerge, I'm telling my businesses, this is your future workforce. This is where you're going to get your workers from. And we want them to be creative and to be able to solve problems and do all the high functioning things that we expect when someone leaves as an 18-year-old, instead of being someone whose growth has been stunted because they were so addicted and they were not paying attention in class, but they also weren't learning how to be a human being to others. And that's what I'm excited about. And I hope Juliet's generation is the last one that has this extra level of stress, especially on the young women, that they don't need to have. So we're coming at the addictive algorithms. They're illegal. You cannot bombard young people under the age of 18 in the state of New York. I hope every other state follows. And just back to what you said about the uniformity, I have heard enough superintendents and school board members and administrators who do not want to be the heavies. And I said, that's my job. I will be the heavy. I will impose this statewide. So there's no question that this is a uniform policy. And at the end of some period of time, we will see a totally different class of young people emerging, more high functioning, more well-adjusted, less mental health problems, and actually graduate with friends, something that I think is long lost. And so I'm excited. It's going to be tough. And just back to the issue that a lot of parents raise, because my kids were young during Columbine, which just sent chills down my spine, like my baby could be affected by a school shooting. But what I did, and I've done this all over the state, I've told the parents, talk to your local law enforcement. They say the last thing, and Jonathan said this, the last thing you want them to be doing is taking videos or talking to their friends or communicating, maybe even exposing where they are, because they have that phone and they want to say hi to mom and dad. But mom and dad, it is safer for your children not to be distracted at this critical moment if that situation befalls the school that your child is in. So we're going to get this done in New York. All your voices are important to me, but Juliet, you're going to be really proud that you were an early voice, but you will not be alone. More people realize how different these young people are. And I'm really can't wait to get this done. And we'll give them time. We'll get this passed. Start weaning yourself from it over the summer. I remember my kids were little. I'd say school's getting closer. You're going to go to bed an hour earlier each night, kind of get conditioned to it. But by next fall, I want young people to be liberated from this addictive device.
Governor Hochul, that's super helpful. And I actually wanted to move briefly to Dr. Jenner and put you back in conversation with Jonathan about some of the possible positive uses of technology. I know your Department of Education has been thinking about innovation and ways to bring technology in, including artificial intelligence and other use cases of technology. Do you agree with Jonathan's kind of perspective on the kind of ideal way to use technology being kind of Khan Academy and nothing else? Or are you and your department kind of seeing other ways that technology we could at least see, are there positive ways to drive better student outcomes?
So I first just want to flag, I'm usually the feistiest person in the room, but being on a call with a bunch of New Yorkers is giving me a run for my money. I just need to say that. So I'm going to quote before Jonathan just gets after me, and Jonathan, I'm ready for it. Jonathan, in your book, you mentioned AI and Khan Academy's education-based AI platform, Khanmigo, and the What Schools Can Do Now solution idea. And so, again, I'm quoting you before I jump right in here.
So she came prepared. She had this ready.
I'm ready. In Indiana, we know that artificial intelligence is here, and we're thinking through how might we best leverage it for the good. So we have worked closely with Khanmigo to really think through a couple of big challenges that we're trying to solve. How might we increase that student tutoring when we might be lacking staff or what have you, and how might we decrease teacher workload? You think that administrative tasks that they have to do that take so much time, how might we get that out of their way so they can focus on teaching and learning? So we launched an artificial intelligence pilot to study a variety of different schools, students, teachers, to figure out again how this might look in Indiana. And I will tell you, because I know we're short on time, Anderson Cooper came to Indiana, did a special on 60 Minutes, specifically looking at the AI and Khanmigo in our classrooms and what we're learning. But a couple of quick takeaways. We hear from our students, it's that the Khanmigo is getting them thinking. It's not just giving them an answer. You can test it. We've tested it a number of ways. It won't just give you that direct answer. It'll challenge your thought. In a room full of 30 students or 20 students even, if a student has an immediate question, they don't have to wait for the teacher or another student. They can go straight
Katie,
to...
we agree about Khan Academy.
We do?
Yeah,
Okay, well,
I
listen,
just said so. Move on.
Jonathan,
tell me some use other than Khan Academy. Tell me something that's been proven good.
Here to sell it. Well, I think that's the main, and the AI is the main thing we're really intrigued with. I think that on the screen time, we're, as has been discussed, pulling back from that. How do we go back and get books in hands and really limit the amount of time students are on that device. And we do not have the special sauce yet. We do not have the recipe. But it is something we are hearing a lot about in Indiana. Less of some of the technology, but then more of some other elements and how we might leverage it better.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So I think we all agree that AI is going to be changing everything. It has enormous potential, very powerful tools. I'm beginning to use it in my work. When we think of technology as a tool used by adults to better accomplish their professional or personal goals, that's great. But education is not about that. Education is about teaching students the skills they will need to become, as Governor Hochul said, to become well-functioning adults. And so our kids need to learn to read. Well, what if we just have AI read for them? Our kids need to learn to write. Well, what if we have AI write for them? I mean, it's like, would you want your daughter to have an AI robot to clean her room from the time she's little, or do you want her to learn to clean her room? Over and over again, what we're seeing is technology makes everything easy, but if you make everything easy for a child, then they can't turn into an adult. And so I'm very, very concerned that AI companions especially are going to become very common for kids. Look, AI to help a teacher handle various things, I'm very open to that. That I think is very promising. There's so much workload that can be, for the teachers, that can be helped by automation and AI. What I'm really focused on is the student experience in class. They need to struggle. They need to overcome challenges. And so if you get slow dopamine, if you get like a graded progress, if AI can help you take you through something very slow and you make progress, then you're getting dopamine, but it's from slow, hard achievement. That's great. If you're doing quick gamified things, then whatever part of the day is gamified makes the rest of the day more boring. So those are some of my concerns. AI is going to make things too easy. We don't know what we're going to do in college because our students are using AI to write their papers, and we can't really, we can catch the extreme cases, but we really can't stop it. And I guess pretty soon we'll just start using AI to grade their papers. And at that point, none of us even need to show up. Just let the AIs talk to each other. That's kind of where we're headed.
We have a lot of questions that have come in from the chat. So maybe what I'll do is I'll end with you, Juliet, in this kind of last set of formal questions, and then we can move to Q&A and go from there. We've got a lot of great school and district leaders tuning in today. Curious if you have any parting thoughts for them on how they might help their students build healthier relationships with phones and social media. You already spoke earlier about how they should bring students into the process of developing policy, which I think is a great piece of advice. What else would you like to kind of leave this group of listeners with?
Yeah, well, despite my earlier hesitations, you guys have sold me. Consider me convinced. I know firsthand just how detrimental social media is, these algorithms are. I know they've been detrimental to me in my life, and I think a world without them and a world where I don't have as easy access to them might be a better one. Not only have you guys convinced me, but you've also given me hope. Governor Hochul, what you said about my generation being the last generation to have to deal with this sort of problem really gave me a lot of hope, because I can be a pessimistic person and I kind of just thought this was the future and I'd accepted it. But to hear that you believe it can be changed really, really inspires me. And I also haven't checked my phone in like 45 minutes and I'm feeling weird about it.
Thanks, Juliet. We're doing really well on time here. So how about we move over then to Q&A. First one here, I would love to get maybe Governor Hochul and Jonathan and others if you want to jump in to weigh in here. Because students spend 14% of their time in school. So how can we be systematic about this problem by putting appropriate pressure on tech companies, families, and other community organizations, rather than just making schools the battleground over phones?
Well, the bulk of the day, the child is in the school, as you mentioned, but I'm also concerned about what happens. My teenage nieces are exhausted because they're online all night long, and they're starting out their day already with a sleep deficit. So we actually brought tech companies to the table here in New York, and some places there's a hostile relationship. We support tech companies. We love having them here in New York, and we're leaning hard into AI, responsible AI, and investing state dollars into this. But they also understood when I said to them, what about your kids? how many hours a day do you want your kids being subjected to addictive algorithms? How is your child doing in school, not paying attention and falling behind? You think that's okay? And again, I'm doing this for your future workforce. Do you want to work with me or against me? I encourage you to work with me. And I said, you're all going to want to sue me. I said, get out of the courtroom and get into my conference room and we'll work with you to solve this. That's why I feel really positive about what we did this last session. No other state's been able to achieve this. And say, be partners with us and you'll ultimately understand why we're doing this for the greater good of society and our economy, which is going to affect you. So we want to make sure that they know this is not a hostile relationship, but
Yep.
they have a moral responsibility to understand the effect that these algorithms have had on young people and the fact that they're taking personal information from children and monetizing our kids' mental health.
Yep.
I pointed that out to them. I said, you can't get away with that in the state of New York. So they have now, the law is you cannot push these addictive algorithms on anyone under the age of 18 and no push notifications during the nighttime hours when our kids need to sleep. So we're working together. Maybe there'll be some court challenges, but I get sued every 5 minutes. So just
Sure.
bring it on. That's the world we live in. So I'm not going to back down from this, but they're better off with me than against me.
I really like that point, Governor Hochul, around asking tech company leaders to look in the mirror. You know, we think about this also in the medical setting. You ask physicians or therapists to say, what kind of standard of care would you want for your own child or for your own parent? And that sometimes is a good indicator on what kind of clinical interventions they trust. Similarly here, you know, a lot of tech leaders, a lot of folks in Silicon Valley are really regulating phone use and social media use for their own kids. So if that's the way that they're running their own family, that probably is a good indication around some of the concerns that might be, you know, around how other kids and other families, you know, should be engaging with social media in a healthy way too. So anyway, I appreciate that point and that frame. Jonathan, anything else on your end?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah.
So first, I always try to make it clear that the tech industry is thousands of companies that are making our lives better. And there's three big ones that own our children's childhood and are severely damaging. And those are Meta, Snap, and TikTok. There's some other companies, and then some ed tech companies come in for some blame. But this is not, look, tech is amazing, wonderful, making our lives better, driving progress. But there are several companies whose business model requires the attention of children. And if you think about it, these companies collectively are worth literally trillions of dollars, literally trillions. And how much have we given them? I haven't paid them a penny, have you? So where did the trillions come from? And the answer is that they've developed ways of attention fracking. They've found ways to go into Juliet's mind and everybody else's mind and take those moments when they're waiting for an elevator, when they're in the shower. They are able to take every moment and monetize it. And that means that our young generation has no moments of consciousness left really for themselves to do something creative. So it would be nice to appeal to their humanity. It would be nice to say, how do you treat your own children? But the nature of a modern free market society, of corporate structure, is that they have to be responsive to their shareholders. And so, conscience be damned, they will do whatever, and we know this from the internal documents when they're sued. The employees are good people. They say, hey, we should do this thing which will help kids. And then management says, no, because it will reduce engagement. Over and over again, you see this in the lawsuits, in the discovery phase. So I don't think these companies are going to just stop hurting kids just because it's the right thing to do. I think it's going to take leadership. Governor Hochul saying she's not going to back down, saying we're going to do the carrot and the stick. We got to do the carrot and the stick. And it's going to be lawsuits and litigation. That, I think, is the only way to change companies whose business model requires as much adolescent attention as possible.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to this point around the role of the courts here. Governor Hochul, by your estimate, you will have had 20 lawsuits, or not 20 lawsuits, you know, over the course of this this webinar. In Ohio, interestingly, they passed a law restricting social media with minors over a year ago, and it's been held up in court since then. How do we as a country, and how will New York as a state move forward? We know this is something you have conviction is the right thing for kids and for schools, while also working, you know, with the courts here.
We feel confident that our laws will always be upheld in court. We are very conscious when we're drafting them of the, you know, the litigation risks. It's just a fact of life and what we're doing here. But also, at some point, there needs to be a rebellion against the ones who will not work with us. And I think the more parents who see the benefits of their child being liberated from these addictions, that they get their child back, someone who actually speaks to them at the dinner table. Imagine that, conversations, real life conversations with families, creating connections where they don't exist now. I think there's got to be this pushback and say, we're here to protect our kids. There are Common Sense Media is working strongly on this. There's a lot of the PTA of New York State supports us. Those are loud, powerful voices. And at some point, these are also the consumers. So I'm saying leave people under the age of 18 alone, and you'll have people age 18 for the rest of their lives who will be using your products and engaging and using them educationally or whatever purposes they have. And by the way, I can't control this during the nighttime hours necessarily. I mean, you're still going to be able to grab the kids when they get home from school. And what we're trying to do is just keep the cell phones locked up during the day. But I can't control this. But this is where parents have an important role to play. An important role. If they know that the negative effects of what's happening to your child, you're seeing your child unravel before your eyes. Your one sweet little 10, 12-year-old is now becoming this very different person, and you don't know what to do and you think it's your fault. It's not your fault, moms and dads. There's something going on that is very sinister here, and we're going to help you stand up to that, help you get your child back. But you don't want to be that only family because your child will be ostracized. That's why we make this more uniform. You start getting that addiction-free hours during the school day and maybe after school, because we're focusing on other activities here. We have unplug and play. We're putting money more toward playgrounds and community groups and all. I'm focusing so much on the mental health of children outside the classroom that they don't slip quickly back into it as soon as the bell rings and they can get that in their hands again. So it's not about outdoor activities, inside activities, investing in all these mental health programs. So I'm going full board to save these kids.
Yeah. I would love to continue in this kind of vein of how parents and families are interacting with these policies, and maybe shift to you, Dr. Jenner. We do work in very rural communities in Indiana and North Carolina, tribal nations in Arizona. We work in very large urban systems in Massachusetts and Illinois. I think we have not seen a super consistent pattern from parents and families around how they first interpret these cell phone bans or social media bans. Some of them are reacting in the way that you're describing, Governor Hochul, where they feel like they want to get their kids back and they're very enthusiastic. But other folks who are working 3 jobs and come home at 9 p.m. and they use their cell phone as a way to have their kids sort of be occupied so that they can get a break. And I think a lot of other folks who are sort of on the fence and haven't thought super deeply yet about, what the impact of these policies could be. I guess practically, Dr. Jenner, how did you all kind of engage families, systematically and learning from them as you were thinking about how to roll out this policy? And I think second, what were the most common themes you were hearing from families? Does it kind of resonate with what Governor Hochul was saying here? Or are there also other factions of parents you were engaging with that, put up, some resistance and had some really, legitimate concerns around the role of regulating social media so much?
As they were talking, I was thinking to myself, some parents and families are addicted to their phones. Children are great imitators. So my own kids call me out frequently. Like, Mom, put your phone up, put your phone up. So I think this conversation is really important when it comes to what happens within the school day, what happens with social media, with our young people. But I also think just as a society, we have people of all ages who are struggling with this addiction to our cell phone. And I don't know if, Jonathan, if you've done any research in that vein, but our parents, again, Joe, to your question, I've shared, at first some of our parents, probably a minority, were saying, gosh, government overreach. But as we've implemented, it has been widely supported. Even I was reading some of the questions and comments. The 2 people on here from Indiana were like, we should go further, So taking that into consideration for sure. But I think there's a broader issue here with the cell phones that I'd love to hear if there's been research done in that respect. Jonathan.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm so glad the conversation is turning this way, and Governor Hochul talking about laws and things that will give kids more play, more recess, because this isn't just about the phones and the iPads in school. What we have to look at is rolling back the phone-based childhood. And it was really striking when Juliet was speaking. It was hard for her to even imagine a world without this because that's all she's ever known. But this is only 12 years old. This only began in 2012. In 2010, it wasn't like this. There was laughter in the hallways in 2010. This is only 12 years old. We made a terrible mistake. We have to roll back the phone-based childhood. But we don't just want to take away the screens and say, ha, now you can't be on TikTok. Okay, what are you going to do? Restaurants won't allow you to go. There are stores. My kids try to go to Target in Brooklyn. They're not allowed in since they're under 18. We've made a world that is not, the real world is not welcoming to adolescence, but the digital world says, come on in, watch porn, play video games all day long. So we have to realize what we're trying to do here is save childhood, as Governor Hochul put it. And that means giving kids back an amazing, fun, real world childhood. And so super briefly, the 4 norms by which we roll this back, if most of us do them, we win. Here it goes. Rule number 1, no smartphone before high school. Just clear all of this out of middle school. Like, parents, don't give your kid a smartphone until at least high school. You can give them a flip phone earlier. 2, no social media before 16. Here's where we really need government help. But until we get that, at least parents can try. That's what I'm doing. My daughter is 15. She's the only one who doesn't have Snapchat among all her friends. But you know what? She sees that it's actually better for her. And she says her friends clue her in when she's missing something. They just text her if there's something that she needs to know. Rule 3, phone-free schools. We've been talking a lot about that. And Rule 4, far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. And so we can make school a lot more fun. Some schools are finding you open up the playground for 30 minutes before class, 7:30 to 8. Guess what? Kids want to come there early. They're not late anymore. They enjoy school more. And the boys especially start first period ready to learn. So this is not just about the phone. This is about restoring an amazing, fun, real-world childhood.
And that is a great place to wrap. Last, just brief logistical question for you, Jonathan. Is there a resource for folks here that kind of encapsulates some of the best arguments and takeaways from your book, The Anxious Generation, that either they could have for themselves to take away from here or could share with their communities?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we have a ton of resources at anxiousgeneration.com. And if you click on the Take Action button, then we have resources for educators, for legislators, for parents, and for Gen Z. There's so much we can do. We do need government help on some things, but most of this we can do within our families, especially if we cooperate with other families, if we do it as a group. Also, I would urge everyone on the call to go to afterbabble.com. That's my Substack. It's free. You don't have to give me any money. And we have lots of stuff recently on EdTech. We have an amazing speech from Sophie Winkleman, a British actress who's been a campaigner in the UK, just today. So go to afterbabble.com, sign up. A lot of really powerful, important, helpful materials, videos for schools. Thank you.
So I'll wrap us here. To all of our panelists, Professor Haidt, Juliet, Governor Hochul, Secretary General, thank you so much for your time. You're all working in very hard, very different ways to support young people in mental health, so thank you. To all the folks who tuned in from schools and other places across the country, thanks for your time. Hope you learned something. We'll be sharing a recording of this webinar in the next couple days, and if you want to see more of that content, you can go to our website, cartwheel.org, and stay tuned for hopefully more action on this soon. Thanks, everyone.
Recording stopped.